Good afternoon, Ms. Rasmusson, ladies and gentlemen, and also good afternoon to members of the audience online. Welcome to the delegation of the Ismailia Mammoth and to this event organized by Aga Khan Foundation Canada. My name is Jennifer Peppel, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs here at AKFC. When the delegation opened some 5 years ago, it was intended as a space for the exchange of ideas, collaboration, and reflection on Canada's role in the world. And as part of this mission, we regularly convene events here of mutual interest and priority for Canada and for the Aga Khan Development Network, the AKDN. Sustainable access to nutritious food is one of the AKDN's key priorities. AKDN takes a multi-pronged approach to strengthening food security by improving farming techniques and crop management, enabling greater financial access for rural entrepreneurs, and facilitating behavior change to help communities recognize the importance of nutrition. And as discussed here at an event we held in September in partnership with the Micronutrient Initiative and the Canadian Network for Maternal and Child Health, proper nutrition is essential to early human development. This, of course, has wider societal implications. Giving young children a good start in life translates into long-term economic and social benefits, helping to break the cycle of poverty. Beyond poverty, there are many external factors that harm the food supply, thus keeping millions of people food insecure. These factors include natural disasters and conflict, which damage farms, markets, and the infrastructure needed to transport food. The World Food Programme works hard to tackle these challenges with the help of various donors, including the Government of Canada. We are therefore delighted to have Ms. Elisabeth Rasmusson here to speak to Canadians about the World Food Programme. The conversation coincides with the tragic events taking place in the Philippines, and it is an unfortunate yet timely example of the need for rapid response by agencies such as the World Food Programme in countries around the world. Ms. Rasmusson recently joined the WFP as the Assistant Executive Director. Her presence here today offers a rare opportunity for the public to learn firsthand more about what WFP's work, especially in fragile contexts, and ways forward to ensure that we reach a food-secure world. I will not read her entire biography. You should have it in hand and also online. It's available on the akfc.ca. And then I'd like to now welcome Ms. Rasmusson to the podium. And after her talk, Steve Mason, the AKFC Director of Programs, will moderate a conversation with Elisabeth and with you in the audience.
Oh, is this too loud? That's better. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your warm welcome. It is really a great pleasure to be here at the Aga Khan Foundation on behalf of the World Food Programme. As Jennifer said, I joined the WFP recently, actually in April this year. And I can tell you that it's been a remarkable 7 months in my current position. I have learned firsthand about the very, very large and I would say very impressive operations that WFP is undertaking around the world. Let me just look at the context. There are actually more than 840 million women, men, and children that cannot meet their food and nutrition needs. Many of them live in crisis-prone places. And in WFP, we serve the most vulnerable of these people. But even if we are doing a very good job, we can only reach a fraction of the 840 million. For WFP, the work traditionally involved moving surplus food from one part of the world to another part of the world, mainly Africa. We were doing that for 50 years. And for these 50 years, we have been delivering food to millions and millions of hungry and vulnerable people. And very often, these people required urgent assistance in very desperate circumstances. In WFP, we have good tools to do that job. We have ships, we have trucks, we have planes, and we have the capability to move food across very vast distances on donkeys, camels, even elephants, to carry smaller loads up mountains and down mountains and through desert storms. We have logistics wizards at WFP who manage these shipments with speed and efficiency, and a network of committed cooperating partners who complete the supply chain by distributing food to hungry people in some of the most remote places, and sometimes the most dangerous places on the planet. In 2008, WFP made a strategic decision. It decided to develop the organization from being a food aid organization to a food assistance organization. Obviously, this development was happening parallel to the development and the change of the Food Aid Convention, or the Food Assistance Convention. So, from handing out food, we are now an organization that is doing much more sophisticated interventions to address the issue of food and nutrition insecurity. We saw that in order to really support people, in order to really make sustainable contributions, we shouldn't just transport food from across the Atlantic or across the oceans. We should try to purchase food locally. And that's what we do now. We try to the extent possible to purchase food. We are working right now with 500,000 smallhold farmers in Ethiopia, just to give you an example. And what does that mean? It means that the farmers, because we buy the food, they get an injection of resources into the production, which allows them to develop in a completely different way. We provide them access to markets, and very often this is a program that we combine with school feeding. So we buy the food locally, and we ensure that the children get their meal in the school, also so that they can enjoy education. This is just to give you an example of food assistance, but we can discuss more of that later. It's important to say that even if we are now transforming and doing more and more food assistance and developing our tools for food assistance, we will still remain a food aid agency. We will continue to develop our logistical capacity, our communications capacity, so that we can respond when we have natural disasters like the super typhoon in the Philippines. WFP is a very big organization. We have around 15,000 people working in 80 countries. And last year we assisted around 100 million people. We have a budget of $4.2 billion for next year. But that's our budget. That's what we know that we can be able to fundraise. The needs for next year is much more. The needs for next year, the operational needs that we know because our country offices have provided us that information, the needs is more than $6 billion. So we are developing into a food assistance organization, but we are also working on the front lines, not only in the Philippines, but also in a country like Syria, which is really our biggest and most complex operation right now. But before I go into the more specific operations to explain to you what we do, I want to emphasize that we are not working alone. We cannot work to ensure food security and nutrition for the people we serve alone as WFP. We partner with NGOs, with UN agencies, with think tanks, with private sector companies, with governments. And we are also working closely with governments around the world to try to assist them in achieving food security for their citizens. But I think the most important is that we are working with the people we serve. We are really trying to make an effort to bring the people we serve into our programs, so that we are able to respond to their needs in the best possible way. The reason for why I'm here in Ottawa today is because many of our strongest and most valued partnerships are here in Canada, whether it's in terms of financial advocacy or support for innovation. Canada has been a steadfast and visionary partner in the fight against hunger. Canada is currently WFP's second largest single country donor. We have more than 80 governments supporting WFP, and Canada is number 2. But it's not just about the money. It's also for us very much about how the money or how the resources are provided. And that's where Canada is a shining example, because Canada is giving us untied resources. And Canada is always asking us, what can we do? Could we try this? Is it possible to find other ways and improved ways? So Canada is also very much a partner that is funding innovative ways of addressing food insecurity. And Canada is a country that is pushing us and should continue pushing us to be more effective and more efficient. And I would say that Canada is also a country that recognizes a good investment when they see one. Because according to global experts, if you invest in nutrition, you will have a 1 to 3 turn back. So if you invest $1 in nutrition to reach the world's most vulnerable, you will have a result of your investment that equals $3. And through these global nutrition investments, children will live longer, healthier lives, and they will contribute to the development of their countries. Canada has invested more than $50 million to enhance WFP's nutritional intervention capacity over the last 10 years. One example where Canada's contribution are already paying off is the iodine initiative. It started in 2005. The government of Canada, the micronutrient initiative, and WFP became partners through this iodine initiative. And to date, more than 11,000 small and medium salt producers have been supported. And this has resulted in the production of more than 660,000 metric tons of iodized salt. Speaking of the micronutrient initiative, who I co-chaired a roundtable with yesterday, they are a global leader and a key partner for WFP in ensuring appropriate micronutrients for the global population. Whether it is the government, organizations like the Micronutrient Initiative, or individual support, WFP greatly appreciates the support that is provided from Canada. In fact, I wanted to note that here in Ottawa, the Carleton University, a student group petitioned their fellow students to introduce a compulsory $2 levy on their tuition fees. And that had resulted that every semester we receive $26,000 from these students. And this support helps us to reach the people in need. And it really motivates us to know that the world is with us and that they are supporting us as we face these enormous challenges. And the challenges are enormous. The super typhoon has left more in the Philippines, has left more than 11 million people affected, more than 500,000 homeless, and more than 2.5 million requiring food assistance. The global response has been both immediate and very generous. And as of yesterday, WFP has dispatched food for more than 2.6 million people. And the numbers, the needs are not static. This is, as you know, a situation which is in under development. We have not yet been able to reach all the areas. We know that there are people in needs that have not had their needs assessed. But we are working very hard with our partners, including partners from Canada, to respond to the needs in the Philippines. In Syria, which is another example, we are scaling up to reach 4 million by December. 4 million people inside Syria. And in October, in spite of very, very severe challenges to do the job in Syria, we managed to distribute food to between 3 and 4 million people. We have a very strong relationship with the Syrian Arab Crescent, the SARC, and 23 local NGOs. We also have a very good partnership with the Aga Khan Foundation in Syria. We provide family food baskets. We supply wheat flour for bakeries, and we support supplementary feeding for malnourished children. So how do we work in Syria? It's a country with a devastating, dramatic conflict. But our colleagues and our partners are every day negotiating access with partners, well, not partners, but actors that control different parts of the territory. We are negotiating with the government of Syria in order to operate in areas that they control. And we are negotiated with armed actors to operate in countries that are controlled by the opposition. We do so-called frontline operations, which means that negotiating with the government of Syria, they provide us, or they allow us to cross the line inside Syria and provide assistance to internally displaced people. Most of them are internally displaced, but also some are not internally displaced, living in opposition-controlled areas. And this is really, really challenging. There are areas in Syria where we don't have access because there are armed groups in Syria who do not allow anybody to provide assistance in their areas. We have had challenges also with food being stolen from us, but we have been able to mainly negotiate so that the food has been given back to us. Of the I don't know how many thousands of tons of food we have provided in Syria since the crisis started. It's less than 1% that is unaccounted for. But this is a very, very, very difficult job, and we can only do it with the help and the support and the partnership from the local NGOs and very generous contributions from governments that are supporting us. We are also working to respond to the refugees in the region. In all the neighboring countries, there are huge refugee populations. Currently, we are supporting 1.3 million refugees. They are in Jordan, they are in Lebanon, they are in Turkey, they are in Iraq, and also in Egypt. And our target is to be able to reach 1.8 million refugees by the end of the year. There are not a lot of positive things I can say about the Syria operation. As you all know, politically, it doesn't seem as if there is going to be a solution anytime soon. And when it comes to providing food assistance, it's inside Syria. it's emergency relief. To the refugees, it's also very much emergency relief. However, one positive aspect is that we have been able to change from providing food to the refugees to then give them food vouchers so that they can take the voucher. If you are a registered refugee, you can get the voucher from WFP worth a certain amount of dollars every month, and you can go to a shop that has been recognized by us, and you can get your food. But now we have gone even one step further. Instead of the paper vouchers, we are able to provide electronic cards to the refugees. So if you are a refugee, we check that you are registered, we give you a card. The card is uploaded every month with a certain amount of money. You can go to the supermarket and you can buy your commodities, your food commodities, and you swipe the card just like any other customer. And this is really a very, I would say, innovative way of providing food assistance. For us, it's much easier because we don't need to deal with all the logistics related to the supply chain. For us, it's also much easier not have to print hundreds of thousands of food vouchers. And for the refugees, you can imagine, they get the card and they can themselves choose the food they want to buy for it. It gives a certain amount of dignity. And for a refugee, it's also very important to be able to have control of some decisions. So this is a way of providing food assistance that we will see developing in many parts of the world. Of course, in order to provide food assistance that way, we are dependent on supply, on a market, and also on partners providing the technology to allow us to do this. Our partner in Jordan and Lebanon is MasterCard. So MasterCard is providing this technology. I also want to briefly touch upon other operations, main operations, like for instance the Central African Republic. We have only heard about the Central African Republic lately because of the terrible negative developments there. But the crisis there is at a height as it was. It hasn't been as dramatic as it is today for the last 10 years. And there is more than 1.3 million food insecure people in the Central African Republic. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the conflict just seems as if it's going on and on and on, even if M23 is now, there seem to be some kind of peace deal. But in the eastern part of Congo, in the Kivus alone, you have more than 1 million people that are displaced from their houses. They are food insecure, and this is a group of people that are displaced over and over and over again. In Kenya, we have huge operations in the refugee camps, Dadaab with more than 500,000 refugees, Kakuma with several hundred thousand. WFP is providing the food to the refugees, but because of funding shortfall, we have been forced to cut the rations 20% for the month of November and the month of December. The worsening security situation in Afghanistan is also presenting a constant challenge in the provision of food and nutrition assistance to vulnerable people in that country. We are constantly monitoring the situation in South Sudan and in the Abyei region in particular, where there is a high risk of displacement. And we remain very, very mindful of the situation in the Sahel, where food insecurity has become even more complicated by the presence of armed groups and political instability. WFP is present in all the countries in the Sahel, and we are working every day to increase access in the northern part of Mali to respond to people's food needs. In WFP, we are supporting agricultural cooperatives. As I told you, we are buying from local farmers, and we call this program Purchase for Progress, or P4P. And this is a project that started some years ago, actually 5 years ago, and it was funded by the Gates Foundation, but it's now supported by other foundations as well, including the Howard Buffett. With the Purchase for Progress, we're trying to tackle the root causes of hunger and food insecurity by helping rural farmers. And we are particularly focusing on female farmers, on women, because we know that, particularly in Africa, women farmers are the ones that we strategically should focus on, as they will be able to produce higher quality food and also secure better the nutritional needs for their families. The pilot has been going on for 5 years in 20 countries, and we are now looking to find partners that can allow us to go from piloting to mainstreaming. And we also want to take it to scale. We want to really try to see how we can expand this Purchase for Progress program. It's not only about the money, it's also about access. It's about ensuring that the farmers are getting the inputs and the know-how they need to improve the quality of their harvest. So we are helping them to do soil testing. We are helping them to get better seeds, fertilizers, and also we have initiatives to try to reduce the post-harvest losses and show them that better quality products will secure higher prices at the markets. And again, these are innovative projects and programs where we are seeking more partners to work with. At WFP, we are committed to ensure that our next emergency response doesn't end with meeting the emergency food needs of the people we serve. Even in the most desperate situations, we try to allow adequate resources, time and space to make sure that our actions offer more than just a band-aid solution. We try to help countries and communities to bounce back stronger with greater capacity to cope for themselves and the next time bad things happen, whether it's a natural disaster or it's a man-made disaster. We believe that building resilience has to be in collaboration with partners, and it has to be with local communities participating, and also with governments at different levels participating. But we have to find the right partners, and we are always working to try to identify the best partners that we can build strategic partnerships with. I would also like to say something about how WFP is investing in children. Last year, we reached 12.6 million children with support to treat or prevent acute malnutrition, stunting, and micronutrient deficiency. We also reached their mothers, almost 4 million pregnant and lactating women with nutritional assistance. This assistance is essential for the first 1,000 days of a child's development in order to prevent detrimental impacts on the physical and mental growth of a child. However, in order to end undernutrition, we cannot stop there. We must also ensure that these vital investments are maintained as children get older. And that's why we are so focused on interventions like school feeding, to make sure that the children can have a meal at school. And for girls, we are also providing a take-home meal so that they are able to get the nutrition that they need. This is short-term benefits, but it's also long-term benefits. Last year, Canada supported school feeding programs in 12 different countries. Almost 650,000 students received nutritious meals at their schools. And this, of course, is an investment in the future, in their future, but also in our future. We believe that no person in our world should suffer from hunger. The Millennium Development Goals provided the global community with a set of shared commitments. Many countries have achieved their goals, but unfortunately, too many have not achieved the goal of reducing hunger by half. So that's why we must continue identifying opportunities, and we must continue assisting those countries. In WFP, together with our partners FAO and IFAD, the Rome-based agencies, our executive heads have made a decision that it's corporate objective to work for a standalone goal for food security and nutrition security. So that's what we are working on now with our partners, to try to make the argument as strong as possible that we do need a separate goal for food and nutrition security post-2015. We had a very interesting session with our NGO partners in Rome a few weeks ago, and particularly the Canadian NGOs were very, very engaged and very willing to take on this responsibility. Obviously, you can say that, and many governments are saying, that the most important thing is to eradicate hunger. Yes, but to eradicate hunger, it's a very wide concept. It's a very wide objective. So that's why we believe it's so important to ensure that there is a single goal for food and nutrition security. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, came out of Rio the summer a year ago, saying that we should all take on the Zero Hunger Challenge. And in the World Food Programme, we have taken this challenge on. We're saying that this is the basis for our strategic plan. This is the basis for everything we do. We should really take on the challenge, and we should reach the vision of a world with zero hunger. And in order to reach this vision, we need to work with all our partners. And that's why I also want to end my talk to you today, to also appeal to you to support us in this work. In WFP, we are convinced that we should be able to end hunger in our lifetime. But if we are going to do that, we need to work together. And we need to start working together today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. That was a very insightful and excellent overview of the work of WFP and some of the core challenges we're facing in the food security agenda. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Steve Mason. I'm the Director of Programs here at AKF Canada, and it's a pleasure for me to moderate this sort of question and answer session with Elisabeth that we have time for now. I can probably imagine that there's quite a few questions that you will have from either from what Elisabeth has presented or from your own experiences working on food security issues. Perhaps before we launch into an open question and answer session, I'll maybe start things off a little bit by asking a few of my own that I have from listening to you. Elisabeth, one of the reflections I was having was on my experience working in Mali in West Africa, which is, as you mentioned in your overview, in a region of the world that faces some chronic food insecurity challenges. I was there at a time where really the start of a severe humanitarian situation happened. So what was, Mali was thought of and thought to be quite a stable democracy, and there weren't a lot of humanitarian actors present. And then you had a food security crisis that was exacerbated by a political crisis, and suddenly it was cast into a humanitarian realm. So we saw WFP come into that situation quite strongly, quite forcefully, and it sort of raised a few questions I'd like to talk to you about now. The first was, and I think I was surprised at the time to realize that you were getting quite a lot of food support from Brazil, in fact. And so I was curious to know from your experience, Brazil was once a country that faced major food security challenges of its own and now has become a food donor, in a sense. So what have been some of the benefits that you found working with former recipients of food aid who are now donors, and what have been some of the challenges of that?
I think that's it's a very pertinent and very interesting question. And when it comes to Brazil, since their former president launched the zero former policy, they managed. Brazil managed to stop hunger. It's amazing. They invested a lot in school feeding. They invested a lot in providing support to poor families. But they came at one stage out of it and said, we have been able to fight hunger in our country. And of course, that is hugely inspirational for other countries facing food insecurity. I participated in a conference in Addis Ababa in June this year, where there were heads of states from Africa, and former President Lula da Silva came, and he gave the keynote speech, and he could make the case that we have done it. You can do it. You political leaders, heads of states, ministers sitting here. If you want to address hunger in your countries, you can do it. And I think that's very valuable. Of course, there are very big differences between some of the countries in Africa and in Brazil. But I think the point here is that he was appealing to the political will of leaders in a very credible way. And of course, you cannot address food insecurity in a country in a sustainable manner unless you have the political leaders wanting to invest in achieving food security. So that's also for WFP working with Brazil. It's an inspiration in many ways. And we have established a so-called Center of Excellency in Brazil. The Center of Excellency is exporting the Brazilian experience. The Brazilian experience related to school feeding is exported to other countries. Other countries come to Brazil, and they have the Brazilians explaining that to them. And honestly, I think that for many visitors, it's more credible to have the Brazilians explaining it because they have lived through it than to have an international aid worker experiencing it, I think. The challenge has been, in a way, that for WFP, moving towards food assistance, we prefer to get the contribution in untied money. With untied money, with cash, we can use the resources much more effectively, including by buying from local markets or from neighboring countries. Now, Brazil has provided donations to WFP as in kind, as food. And there is a challenge because they give us the food, but they don't have the money to pay for the transport and the logistics. So we need to fundraise that from other countries, and other countries are saying, we don't want to pay for that. Brazil can pay for it themselves. So that's been a bit of a challenge. We have been able to find a solution. We can always negotiate through it. But that's one of the, what should I say, technical challenges that we are facing.
Thank you. The other thing that sort of was obvious in the Mali situation was, the particular food security crisis was worsened by the political crisis. It was definitely something that was going to be an ongoing factor of life in that country. the root of the food security crisis was really a failed agricultural season, which are happening more and more frequently, especially in the Sahel region of the country. While the whole response was ongoing, there were a lot of conversations happening on the whole side of resilience, as you mentioned, and how to mitigate future disasters so that there was less of a need for the type of emergency response that we saw was necessary. So you mentioned a little bit in your presentation that this was something that WFP was also looking at. So I guess I would like to know a little bit more about how WFP is looking at that issue of resilience, and also whether there's a concern within the organization of perhaps casting the net too widely. If you're going to be a food assistance organization but also start getting into the resilient side and working on agricultural productivity, is there a concern sort of a mission creep or not having the sort of capacities or personnel to do it all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all UN agencies are accused of being mission creeps. We're not the only one. But I wouldn't call it mission creep. I would call it a more, as I said in my speech also, we do want to be an agency that address food insecurity needs with more than a Band-Aid. We do want to address food insecurity and emergency needs with leaving behind something which can represent sustainability in the communities that we are working with. And that's, you know, when you are present in the field, in the deep field, in such a vast way as WFP, because we're not only in 80 capitals, we are in the deep field, we are there with the local communities. And it's so obvious, with not very heavy investments, you can really ensure that there is some resilience. The concept of resilience is a concept that can be debated in many ways. Is it humanitarian? Is it development? Is it the bridge? I mean, for me, resilience is really, we are there, we are able to work with the local communities to do some quite simple interventions to make sure that they can absorb shocks the next time they come. And that's why I think with the presence of WFP, with the knowledge we have related to food issues, we should take advantage of that presence. We do not get involved in agricultural production as an agriculture agency. That is others that should do that. But we try to do our part and then hand over. Obviously, Mali is a big challenge. It remains a big challenge. It was the drought, the natural disaster, if you will. But also, as you know, when Gaddafi fell in the revolution, if you will, in Libya, and a lot of former soldiers of Gaddafi were Malians, and they took the weapons and they came back. And that's how, you know, the political and the armed turmoil started. There has been elections in Mali this summer. It remains to be seen how sustainable the relative political stability that we find in the country now is going to be. We don't know yet. One thing which is absolutely crystal clear is that northern Mali remain completely underdeveloped. There are other ethnic groups, as you know, living in the northern Mali compared to in the south. They feel that their needs are not addressed by the government in Bamako, and as long as they feel that they have to be in the north without much development, nor physical development, nor political development, the situation in Mali is going to remain unstable. And with that also the food insecurity is going to remain.
Perhaps I'll just ask one more question, then I'll open up the floor. You gave a couple of interesting examples of work with the private sector. One on the whole iodine project, and then also your work with MasterCard in terms of getting the actual vouchers for refugee camps. So I was curious to know how important the private sector is as a partner for WFP globally, and what you have found to be some of the benefits and challenges of working with the private sector.
Well, again, moving to food assistance, we see that the private sector is hugely important. And we have developed as an organization from seeing private sector as a contributor of cash only to a contributor of in-kind, ideas, complementary resources, if you will, that we need in order to develop more sophisticated interventions. When we are working with, for instance, DSM, when we are working with Unilever, these are companies that are doing micronutrients. They produce, vitamins and other things like that. We can work with them because they have the know-how and the technology that we need in order to be able to make superfood and fortified food, for instance. So we see that the partnership with the private sector, ideally, is a partnership where we identify common objectives, a common goal, and we see that in order to reach that goal, we need the complementary resources of private sector actors and WFP. Obviously, the challenges with the private sector is private sector is there to make money. That's the raison d'être of private sector, and that needs to be understood. They cannot make money on WFP, so we need to keep a firewall, for instance, when it comes to procurement. If we are procuring from a private sector partnership company, there is a firewall between our procurement procedures and the partnership we have on other issues. And then, of course, we also have to do a very robust due diligence, because we need to ensure that the private sector partners that we are working with are not breaking the law, are not in violation of UN resolutions, and are also not representing a reputational risk to WFP.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll just take questions from the floor. If we have a microphone that's sort of going to rove around, I guess, and perhaps we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then Elisabeth can answer them. If you could just maybe briefly introduce yourself before you ask your question, that would be useful. So we have Shane up front, and then we have someone here, and then we'll go back to Mark and over to there.
Shane Roberts. I'm here as a volunteer with the United Nations Association, an educational NGO. And I just completed over a decade of work with the Canadian federal government as a futurist for emergency management, trying to get the government to think long-term about forces and factors that either represent threats that could cause disasters or evolving vulnerabilities. Now, it's amazing and encouraging to hear about the work of the WFP. And imagine the way that some incredible disasters can pop up overnight, like the typhoon, or can go on, like Syria, that you have your hands more than full. But my question is, do you either have the opportunity or allies who are able to help you to look ahead, to anticipate the drivers and forces that may give opportunities for meeting or aggravate the problem? And particularly as a futurist, I'm thinking of the issues around climate change, weather, the findings of the World Meteorological Organization and the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is about your forward vision and whether you can actually afford that, or you have others who are helping you.
Thank you, Shane. We'll take 2 more, and then we'll let Elisabeth answer.
Hi, my name is Giselle Yasmin. I'm with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. We're a funding agency. I'm also a food researcher. And I was very happy when you brought up the question of your work in post-harvest losses. My understanding is we produce enough food on the planet to feed 10 billion people, but about 30 to 50% is wasted and doesn't even make it to the market, which is horrible when you think about. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more. I mean, you've talked about your role in war and conflict and in emergency situations, but if you could elaborate a little bit. And it really boggles my mind why there is not more attention paid to this. And I have my theories, but why? But because the approaches to addressing these issues are, relatively simple. And thank you for the Brazil example, another, showing that it is a political will question.
Great. And maybe we'll just take one last question this round from Mark.
Yes, Ms. Rasmussen, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. My name is Mark Stiles. I'm a consultant in monitoring and evaluation. I was pleased to hear you mention that WPF can't do it all alone, that you need to be collaborating. Can you tell us what mechanisms for collaboration appear to be working well, particularly within the UN system? And what challenges do you face in that regard? Thank you.
Great. So you can take those in any order you want.
Okay, I'll start with the first one, and that's if we have partners that can help us to look ahead. The answer is yes. In the UN system, there is actually, believe it or not, a very, very strong and ongoing collaboration. I would say particularly between the humanitarian UN agencies and NGOs. In 2005, the then Emergency Relief Coordinator, who is the UN person responsible for coordination of humanitarian assistance, he started the so-called humanitarian reform. And in that humanitarian reform, it was also trying to look at how can the different UN agencies work together on sectors. And one of the areas that everybody realized that we have to work together on is preparedness. We need to be prepared. And in order to be prepared, not only do we have to have the resources to respond, but we also need to be able to kind of like look into the future, if you will. So there is a lot of collaboration going on between UN agencies and think tanks, looking into issues like climate change, but also looking into the predictability of weather forecast. So with the UN Meteorological Organization, it was interesting because I'm reading the updates from the Philippines every day. And I was looking in one of the SITREPs, the situation reports that I saw, that we are predicting, we are able to predict the typhoons and the bad weather, if you will, the different types of bad weather coming into the Philippines for the rest of this winter. And also there are some pretty good predictions on where typhoons will make landfall. Of course, this is not 100%, but it serves to illustrate the fact that we are working together and we are prepared. WFP, we all knew about the landfall of this latest typhoon, so we had pre-positioned people in areas in the Philippines. And of course, for us, climate change, or what should I say, climate change-induced natural disasters, because climate change itself is not having any effect. It's the natural disasters that comes as a consequence that is hugely affecting food security. So that's something colleagues in WFP are working with colleagues in FAO and other UN agencies to try to understand better. On the post-harvest losses, I mean, again, there are simple things: warehouses, logistics, access to markets. Why there is not investments? I think one of the reasons is because, and I'm sorry to say, but when there is a drama, when there is a conflict, when you can have a big, very compelling story on the television, there is money from private sector, from individual, from governments. When you try to raise money for prevention or for post-harvest losses, you don't, if we are going to get the resources, we need to be able to tell the compelling story. And that's where I think we as humanitarians, or we as development actors, we really have a challenge. We are not able to tell our stories well enough. Because that to deal with post-harvest losses is not overly complicated. I mean, you can do a lot with very simple technology. So WFP is doing it, but we lack resources to really have the interventions that we want. Mechanisms of collaboration in the UN system, I would say particularly in the humanitarian that I know the most, because that's my background, we have very, very good collaboration. There is always hiccups. There is always a lack of, sometimes agreement. But there are coordination structures, the so-called cluster system, where we work collaborative together. Again, when you watch television and you see a typhoon strikes in the Philippines, journalists just love to say that this is terrible, the UN is not there, it's too late. But, when you have a disaster like that, it's not that simple. And when you look at how the humanitarian response has taken shape now, also with support from Canada and other governments, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And we are in the humanitarian UN system together with our NGO partners, constantly trying to work together to see how we can address the collaboration or the coordination. And I've been in this business for a long time, and I have to say that the improvements compared to 20 years ago is just enormous. It's really, really, really an improvement. And that's what we have to look at, not the ideal, because it can always be better.
Great, we'll take some more questions. I'd also like to mention that we do have an online audience through our webcast, so if there are any questions that would like to come from that audience, you can send them in and somebody will read them out. So we have, let's just take these three here, you and then you and then you. So let's go.
Hi, my name is Peter, and I've worked for an NGO as an implementing partner for World Food Program in South Sudan and food and nutrition programs. So we always had a very positive experience with the logistics cluster and with working with WFP. My question, you mentioned that you want to support small-scale farming initiatives, especially ones that are run by women. So what are the chief considerations in the procurement side when you're procuring large amounts of food from local markets? What are your chief considerations, and how does that tie into your goals to support small-scale farming, and especially those run by women?
Great, thanks. And we'll go just behind there. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Morris Haladik. I write on food, and I've written a book which I want to give to you today, and it covers some of the issues that you discussed, and we're in agreement. But my question to you is on genetic modification. I know you do not become directly involved with agricultural practices, but as far as world food security is concerned, what is your opinion regarding the technology, both in countries that are surplus food producers today and in your client countries?
Okay, and we have just behind you, actually. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Diane Beckett. I want to follow up on the first question on the purchase for progress, and I'm interested in the model of agriculture that you support, and what sort of inputs and the seed saving, and what sort of model around eco-agriculture or organic or commercial.
Great. Okay, we'll just take those and then go for another round. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on the purchase for progress, one of the main procurement considerations is, of course, the need. What kind of food is needed? What kind of food are we able to buy? We have in the school feeding and also in the so-called food basket certain requirements when it comes to the composition, and those requirements needs to be filled. We also see that when it comes to the P4P, or the purchase for progress, WFP is not a sustainable market. We don't represent a sustainable market, and we are trying to get other partners that can purchase, and that should be private sector, that can purchase. But in order to do that, we need to also help the farmers to make sure that there is a certain quality, there is a certain quantity, and there need to be access to market. Then there need to be logistics. So those are some of the main considerations. The last question related to organic farming. what we are doing with when we work with local farmers, we are not able to take organic farming into consideration. Maybe we should, maybe other partners should take on that responsibility, but organic farming has not been a priority for WFP, in the sense that we are providing, or we are facilitating the provision of fertilizers to farmers, if that's what you mean with organic farming. On the GMO, the question is very, very, it's a large question, it's a complicated question. I know it's a question that is very much debated here in Canada. But from WFP, the answer is very simple. We follow national legislation. So if we have a donor that wants to provide in-kind GMO commodities to us, we will distribute those commodities in countries that don't have legislation that prevent it. If there is legislation in a country preventing GMO commodities, we will respect that legislation. And that's also why you will see that in some countries we need to put up mills in the ports to be able to show governments that we are not in violation of their legislation.
Thank you. So let's go here. Yeah. Can you have a mic over here? Yeah, then you next. Yeah.
Hi, Elisabeth. I'm Sherry Arnott from World Vision International, and I work with the Food Programming Management Group. I have a question that relates to the very first question that was asked around sort of where food assistance will be in 10 years. So when you spoke about the sort of seismic shift in the sector from food aid to food assistance, the fact that more and more emergency resources are used in situations of chronic food insecurity with acute spikes. Some of the issues, the complexity, the increasing engagement in conflict situations, and what that requires for the humanitarian imperative of WFP, and then sort of tying that to, so not only where do you think the food assistance sector will be in 10 years? A very easy question to ask, I imagine. But also sort of where the role and engagement with partners sort of needs to go.
Great, thanks. So we have the gentleman just behind there.
Thank you. My name is Robin Hyam. I'm at the University of Ottawa as a senior fellow. But I was a permanent representative for Canada to the FAO and the World Food Programme longer ago than I would like to recall, 1978 to 82. And first of all, to congratulate the conversation we've had so far. It is 20 years advanced, if not more, from the conversations we had then. But I have three questions, short questions, and require only short answers. Can you give us a rough idea of the balance now that you're dealing with in terms of donations in dollars and donations in kind? When I was working on the project, Canada was being encouraged to shift from pledges in dollars to pledges in tonnage. So the when prices of cereals went up, our donation didn't go down. Of course, Finance and Treasury Board didn't like that idea and kept us in dollars. But now that you're using local purchase, I think you've dealt with that. But I'd like to know, how many Brazils are you dealing with out there, and what's left with the others? Second question, triage. How do you do triage when you have half as much money as you need? Where do you draw the line on what kind of projects and what kind of, which countries you deal with? Where's the, where do you eliminate and where do you approve? I guess it's a function of the discussions in the council, but it would be interesting to know, are there rules of thumb on how you decide where to spend your resources and where not? Third question, also very short. Where is it? When starvation is a weapon, as I think we see sometimes in Sudan, in Somalia, and certainly in Syria, how do you manage? Is there such a thing as clandestine food aid?
Mm. Thank you. Do we have one more question for this round? Oh, go ahead, yeah. Sorry, yes.
I just wanted to follow up on one of the questions that was asked in terms of support for women smallholder farmers. You didn't touch on that in the procurement piece, and I'm just wondering, general approach to supporting women in farming through procurement schemes, but also more generally, perhaps seeing if there's been an evolution in the way the World Food Programme addresses gender equality through its food aid and assistance, and if you've seen a shift in the past years.
Great questions. So, yeah. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I can see that you have been a perm rep. Very good questions. I'm looking at my colleague to get the...
I saw a computer opening up over here, so there's...
You know,
there's
honestly,
some
I can't tell you exactly. Maybe you can, Mary, or Caroline.
Globally, it's about 50-50 in kind versus cash. From Canada, it's 100% cash. It's 100%
Thank you. And it's the in-kind, whereas the in-kind, part is going down, the cash is going up, but now it's 50-50. So we're on top of the of the curve, so to say. The priorities related to spending the resources we have, when we have a shortfall of 33% related to the operational needs. Some of the priorities is given by donors earmarking. Donors are still giving a lot of direction on where their money should go. So that provides for a lot of the prioritization. And then we have the multilateral donations that are completely untied and free. When there is a shortfall in a country, we have a committee in WFP that sits together and we look at different criteria, because then we are trying to spend the money responding to the most urgent needs. So that's the way we are doing that's the way we do the priorities. When starvation is a weapon, how do we deal with it? Well, we can deal with it through advocacy and making the case that people have a right to food and negotiate access. And sometimes we will be able to get access locally, in small pockets. But WFP is not a political actor, and WFP we cannot violate laws and rules of a country. So in situations like that, we are a bit stuck with the tools that we have that we can control. And then of course we do rely on other actors that can change the decision or change the politics. Yeah, and then the women. How do we deal with the women in local, in the P4P? We are actually targeting women farmers, and we are targeting and prioritizing working with cooperatives where women are in the leadership, and we are also providing training to make sure that women can come in the managerial positions of the local cooperatives. WFP has a gender policy that was adopted in 2009. It has just been evaluated, and we are looking at it. I have to say that even if we have made progress, we are not there yet. We still have work to do when it comes to gender mainstreaming in WFP. I think we have taken over the last few years a big step when it comes to really understanding how extremely important women in agriculture is. So this is something that we are focusing on. But when it comes to gender mainstreaming in our programs, we still have work to do. Because, again, gender is a concept that not everybody understands, really, well enough.
Then we had Sherry's question just about...
And then I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry. It's the, from World Vision, a very important partner for WFP. We are working together in many, many countries. Where do I see food assistance in 10 years? I can tell you where I hope to see food assistance in 10 years. And I hope to see food assistance in 10 years where we, as the community, UN, governments, NGOs, working in food assistance, my hope is that we have been able to develop even more sophisticated and efficient tools, and that we are able to analyze the context and apply the right tools in the right situations. That's really my hope. And in order to do that, we need to partner stronger. We need to be able to identify strategic partners and not waste time and resources on partnerships that don't go anywhere.
So I think we have time for just 2 more questions, and then we have to, unfortunately, let Elisabeth go to her next engagement. So we have here, perhaps we'll just take these 2.
Thank you so much. It's true that WFP is always there where there is a problem. And I'm glad that you mentioned, apart from food aid, you are also looking into food security and nutrition availability to the communities. This will take us like a complete cycle in the process. As you also mentioned, you cannot do it alone. You have to do this with partners. But as an initiator, as you mentioned, for the last 50 years, Africa was the recipient of food aid, and I think it will continue to do so unless things are not changing. So from food aid to food security, farmers producing their own food and having their dignity, and once having food on their table, then looking into nutrition, this will take like a complete cycle. How do you track the development so that you are not going back to the same community with food aid? Because things are happening in a very fragmented way. People are focusing on one issue, then other things emerge, or they will not have resources, so they move on. So how do you see communities graduating and continuing in a sustainable development path? Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much for coming. A very stimulating address. Doug Ward is my name. I'm with Farm Radio International. And I have a question about Purchase for Progress, as does, I think, everyone else in this room. The question is this, that we found in our work that standards can be a stumbling block. And it seems to me that if you have a crisis and you need teff or you need rice or something, and you hold smallholder farmers to a high standard, that you might be but it's food that is eaten there. I mean, it's eaten in that country at that standard. I just wondered if the high standards of the World Food Program might be a stumbling block. I can understand that if you're trying to move it halfway around the world and store it for a year or something, that might be a problem, the moisture percentage in the crop or something. But if it's going to be used that year in that country and everybody else in the country is eating it at that standard, then the higher standard demanded by the World Food Program can be a problem in terms of small-scale farmers selling their product to the WFP.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. How can we track and how can we ensure that we don't move backwards, that when we have provided food assistance, we don't end up providing food aid in the same situation? I think the answer to that question is it shouldn't happen if we are successful with our resilience programs. If we are able to ensure resilience at local level, but also at other levels, then communities should be able to absorb shocks themselves. Obviously, this is not a 100% answer because there will be disasters, natural disasters, no matter how resilient you are. You might need food aid. And there is nothing wrong with food aid. I think that the big challenge is really to make sure that the food aid situations are as few as possible. But I think the international community has to be ready to respond when national governments are not able to respond to the food needs in crisis. So, but again, by building more resilient communities, those situations should be fewer. That's the way I see it. And then a main partner in this is, of course, the local communities. I mean, nothing is sustainable in food security if you're not working with the local actors and if they are not able to take on a large responsibility. You're pointing at a very important question related to the standards. We are bound by international standards, and we need to obey by that. To overcome the obstacle related to standards for local purchasing, one way of doing that is precisely to work with the local farmers to make sure that they can increase the quality of their crops. And we can do that by fertilizer, irrigation, and also, of course, storage and logistics.
Great, thank you so much. So that does bring us to the end of our session today. I would like to thank Elisabeth Rasmusson very much for her participation and spending some time with us today. She has quite a packed schedule while she's in Canada, so we do appreciate her having the time to sort of stop by and exchange with us on some of the really important work that WFP is doing. I would also like to thank you in the audience for your active participation. I unfortunately had to cut it short. I can tell there's a lot more questions out there. So it's always painful to cut one of those discussions short. So thank you, and hopefully we will see all of you at some of our future events that we'll be holding coming up. And finally, I would like to invite you all to join us for a little reception that will take place out in the atrium. So thank you very much.
Thank you.